Jason Carter never asked for much. Just a quiet life in a neighborhood where he could mow his lawn without judgment and sip his coffee without choking on frustration. He kept to himself, paid his bills on time, and never made trouble for anyone. But every Sunday morning, before the world was fully awake, before the neighborhood started buzzing with lawnmowers and gossip, Jason did one thing without fail. He drove down to the cemetery with a bouquet of deep red roses, the kind his son, Mark, had always admired. Mark was a Marine through and through, the kind of man who didn't serve for medals or parades but because he believed in something bigger than himself. When the time came, he gave everything, his life, his future, his father's only child gone in a war Jason could barely wrap his head around. But this ritual, this simple act of brushing the stray leaves off Mark's headstone and talking to him like he was still listening, was the only way Jason knew to keep going. He never expected peace from life, not anymore, not since the flag was folded and handed to him with words that felt like empty echoes. But he didn't expect cruelty either. Certainly not from the likes of Karen Whitmore. She wasn't just another nosy neighbor, she was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, a woman whose thirst for control seeped into every corner of the neighborhood. Her emails arrived like clockwork, filled with passive-aggressive reminders about mailbox colors and grass heights, each word dipped in condescension. Her violations were weapons, and every homeowner knew better than to cross her. Jason had learned to let it roll off his back. He ignored the notes taped to his door, the insults disguised as polite suggestions. What mattered to him was what happened at Mark's grave. That was sacred. Untouchable. Until it wasn't. That Sunday morning, the sky hung low and heavy, gray clouds pressing down as though the world was holding its breath. Jason parked in his usual spot, cradling the roses like they might break if he squeezed too tight. He made his way down the familiar row of white headstones, each one a story cut short, a sacrifice made. But then he saw her. Karen. Standing there by Mark's grave, arms folded, a smirk curling the edges of her lips like she knew she didn't belong and didn't care. Jason's heart skipped. Maybe she was here to lecture him about something absurd, like the flowers violating cemetery rules. But then she tilted her head back, pursed her lips, and spit. Right on his son's name. For a moment, Jason couldn't move. The world seemed to narrow, his vision tunneling until all he could see was that foul spit sliding down the carved letters of his boy's name. Mark Carter. United States Marine Corps. Honor. Courage. Sacrifice. Desecrated by a smug, power-drunk woman who thought the world existed to serve her whims. She didn't even flinch. She just smirked and turned, her heels clicking against the stone path like she was walking away from a board meeting she'd just won. Jason's fists clenched so hard his nails bit into his palms, sharp enough to draw blood. But he didn't move. He remembered Mark's words, strength isn't about throwing fists. It's knowing when not to. Jason held that rage inside, let it simmer, let it freeze into something cold and sharp. He didn't shout, didn't cause a scene. He just turned on his heel and walked back to his truck, each step heavier than the last, like the weight of what he'd just witnessed might break him in two. By the time he slammed the door shut and the echo rattled down the street, his mind had already shifted. He wanted to call the police, wanted to scream from the rooftops what Karen had done. But he knew better. She was too connected. Her husband was a well-known attorney in town. Her inner circle included city officials, bank managers, and property developers. The police wouldn't do a damn thing. She'd twist the story, make herself the victim, paint him as an unhinged grieving father lashing out. They'd believe her. People always did. Karen wore respectability like armor, hiding the predator underneath. But Jason wasn't about to let this go. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but he knew it wouldn't involve begging for justice from a system that had already failed. That night, Jason sat in the dim light of his study, staring at his laptop like it held the answers he needed. At first, it was just small searches. Public records. HOA bylaws. Community meeting minutes. But the deeper he went, the more the threads began to unravel. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance. She was a predator with a carefully built empire of manipulation and destruction. Jason found story after story in old online forums, buried deep under years of silence. Families hit with absurd violation notices for things as trivial as having the wrong color mulch or leaving holiday decorations up a day too long. Retirees who had lived in their homes for decades suddenly drowning in legal fees after Karen's HOA tacked on penalties so rapidly they couldn't keep up. Single parents crushed under fines that doubled and tripled overnight. And then he found the pattern. It wasn't random. Karen had a blacklist, an actual list of families she targeted. People marked as vulnerable. Notes in the margins: widow, husband died in Iraq, likely behind on bills, push violations. Or single mom with health issues, weak, easy target. Jason felt his stomach twist into knots as he read those cold, calculating entries. But what broke him was seeing his own name. Jason Carter, veteran father, emotionally fragile. Push boundaries, likely to crack under pressure. She'd seen his grief as an opportunity. A weakness to exploit. But it didn't stop there. Jason's contacts, old friends of Mark's from the Marines, men who had served, who knew how to dig deep, helped him go further. What they found made Jason's blood run cold. Karen wasn't just running an abusive HOA. She had been siphoning money through a fake non-profit she had created, the Honor First Foundation, supposedly to help struggling veterans with housing assistance. In reality, every donation, every grant dollar, every bit of goodwill was funneled into her personal accounts. Lavish vacations. Designer clothes. Photos surfaced of Karen in 5-star resorts in Europe, sipping champagne with the same smug smile she wore standing over Mark's grave. Worse still, Jason uncovered video recordings from private HOA meetings, gatherings where Karen's tone shifted from public charm to private venom. In one, she laughed as she discussed veterans behind closed doors. They're all the same. Parading around with their medals and flags, thinking the world owes them something. They're easy marks if you know how to press the right buttons. Jason couldn't breathe. He sat there, fists clenched on his desk, staring at the vile truth laid bare on his screen. Karen had built an empire of suffering. She preyed on the very people his son had died protecting. And now, she had spat on his grave, not out of impulse, but as part of a game. A power play. She thought she was untouchable. Jason exhaled slowly. He wasn't going to beg the police. He wasn't going to play by her rules. He was going to burn her entire world to the ground. Jason didn't sleep that night. The weight of what he had uncovered sat heavy on his chest, a pressure that only tightened with every new detail he unearthed. But he knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. This wasn't about one man standing up to an HOA tyrant. This was a war against a machine built on corruption, fear, and greed. And if there was one thing his son had taught him, it was that no soldier wins a war without his unit. He reached for his phone, scrolling through contacts he hadn't touched in years. Names that brought back memories of Mark's days in uniform, stories told over beers and barbecues when everything still felt whole. He hesitated over each name before finally pressing call. The first voice that answered was steady and familiar: Ethan Brooks, one of Mark's closest brothers in arms, now running private security work. Jason didn't have to explain much. Ethan's tone shifted the moment he heard Karen's name and what she had done. "Say no more, sir. We've got your back." The second call was to Tyler Granger, Mark's old intel contact, now working in military intelligence. Tyler was quiet but efficient, asking the right questions, and already promising to dig into Karen's digital footprint. The third call was to Logan Price, now a state police officer. Logan didn't hesitate either. "You tell me what you need, Mr. Carter, and I'll make sure it happens." Within hours, Jason's quiet study transformed into a command center. His laptop pinged with encrypted files, Tyler sending over confidential reports and hidden server data. Ethan reached out to his network, finding homeowners too afraid to speak publicly but desperate for someone to finally take Karen down. Logan shared backdoor access to city property records and flagged transactions that didn't make sense. And then came the messages from people Jason never expected. Emails from neighbors, quiet knocks on his door. Melissa Grant, the single mother Karen had nearly bankrupted, showed up on his porch with a box of old HOA letters, each one more threatening than the last. "I didn't know who to trust," she said, her voice trembling. "But if you're doing something about her, I want to help." Walter Higgins, the elderly veteran who had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone, shuffled up to Jason's porch late one evening. He handed over a weathered manila envelope with shaking hands. "I kept copies," he whispered. "Bank statements. HOA reports." It never added up. Inside were records of massive payments disguised as community expenses that vanished into accounts linked to shell corporations. The pieces started falling into place faster than Jason could process. But the most damning discovery came from Tyler. He cracked into Karen's encrypted folders and found the unthinkable, a recording Karen had made herself. She was in her lavish living room, surrounded by designer decor, holding a glass of wine. "This neighborhood belongs to me," she sneered to her private circle. "They're just sheep. I spit on that grave because I could. Because they need to remember who holds the power." Her friends laughed in the background. It wasn't just arrogance. It was cruelty, calculated and proud. Jason stared at the screen, his heart pounding. The evidence was more than enough for local police, but he knew better. Karen's web of influence stretched too far. Judges, council members, even real estate developers, all in her pocket. If he handed this over to local authorities, it would vanish into a drawer, never to see the light of day. He needed to go higher. He gathered every document, every transcript, every damning image and recording. He compiled spreadsheets, timelines, and annotations, making sure nothing could be twisted or buried. When the stack of evidence was finally complete, he didn't waste another second. He drove straight to the nearest FBI field office. No appointment. No hesitation. Just a father walking into battle for his son one last time. At the front desk, the agent looked up, startled by the urgency in Jason's voice. "I need to speak to someone about federal crimes." The words hung heavy in the air. He was led to a small, sterile room where Special Agent Mitchell Stone sat across from him, arms folded. The agent's eyes flicked over the first few pages of Jason's report, the skepticism all too familiar. Another homeowner with a vendetta. Another HOA complaint. But then Agent Stone's expression shifted. His casual posture stiffened. He flipped page after page, his brow furrowing deeper. The numbers didn't lie. The bank transfers. The fraudulent contracts. The veteran exploitation schemes. Wire fraud. Money laundering. Agent Stone set the papers down slowly and looked Jason in the eye. "Where did you get all this?" Jason didn't smile. "Does it matter?" Stone didn't press. He picked up the phone instead. Within minutes, 2 more agents entered the room, followed by a third. They spread out the documents across the table, flipping through pages, trading glances that grew heavier with each revelation. Jason sat in silence, watching the storm gather. He didn't need to say a word. The truth was loud enough. The storm didn't take long to break. Jason left the FBI building with the weight on his shoulders lighter but not gone. He knew the evidence was in the right hands, but there was still silence, that unbearable, watchful silence before the thunder hit. He went home and waited, each hour stretching longer than the last. But it wasn't the FBI that moved first. The first crack came from a place Jason never expected, a small, local news channel known for feel-good stories and community fundraisers. They ran a quiet piece about the incident at the cemetery. Just 5 minutes, a short segment between the weekend weather and a story about a school bake sale. Jason hadn't contacted them. He hadn't sought attention. But someone had seen Karen that day. Someone with a phone and a sense of outrage. The story aired once, and within hours, it exploded. Social media caught fire. Veterans groups, military families, Gold Star parents, they all saw the footage. A woman, standing over a fallen Marine's grave, spitting on the headstone, smirking as though it were a joke. They didn't care who she was. They cared about what she did. The hashtag started trending, hashtag justice for Mark, hashtag veterans deserve respect, hashtag HOA horror. Thousands of posts. Then tens of thousands. And the flood didn't stop at words. People started showing up. Not just locals, veterans from across the state, across the country. At the next HOA meeting, Karen walked into the clubhouse expecting business as usual. What she found was a wall of silence, rows of men in old uniforms, their jackets stiff with medals, their faces carved from stone. Women with service ribbons pinned to their collars, standing with folded arms. Active duty soldiers at the back of the room, silent sentinels. They didn't shout. They didn't protest. They simply stood there, watching. And Karen, for the first time in her life, couldn't look anyone in the eye. She tried to spin it. Her voice shook as she screeched into the microphone. It was sarcasm. A misunderstanding. You people don't get it. But there was no hiding. The video spoke louder than her excuses. The clip of her laughing about the incident in her private chat surfaced next. Her own words. Her own smug laughter. And with that, any defense crumbled. Panic set in. Jason watched it unfold like watching an empire sink. Karen stopped appearing in public. Her mansion, once the neighborhood's crown jewel, went dark. The windows shuttered. The for sale sign appeared on the lawn days later, the price slashed and marked motivated seller. Jason knew she was trying to run. He knew her playbook before she wrote it. She drained her accounts, every last one, even the secret offshore funds Tyler had tracked down. Hundreds of thousands vanished into shadowy transactions, routed through shell companies she thought were untraceable. But every move she made was already under federal surveillance. She booked a one-way ticket to a Caribbean island under a false name, paying in cash. She thought she could vanish, slip through the cracks before the walls caved in. But the walls were already falling. In a last-ditch effort, she filed a police report against Jason, claiming he had threatened her, that he was orchestrating a campaign of harassment. She even tried to obtain a restraining order, hoping to discredit him, to paint him as the aggressor. But the FBI stepped in before the paperwork could even be processed. Her lies collapsed under the weight of recorded evidence and public fury. The morning she tried to leave, she stepped out of her front door with sunglasses perched high, her chin up, pretending she still mattered. She took 3 steps toward her car before the unmarked SUVs pulled in from all directions. Agents poured out, weapons holstered, badges flashing. Karen Whitmore, an agent called out, loud enough for every neighbor to hear, "You are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, real estate fraud, and exploitation of veterans." She spun on her heel, wild-eyed. "You can't do this. I have friends in." The handcuffs snapped shut before she could finish. Neighbors stood on their porches, phones raised, capturing every second. News crews arrived almost instantly, their vans lining the street. Karen was shoved into the back of a black SUV, screaming that they were making a mistake, that this was illegal, that she would ruin them all. But nobody listened. Jason stood at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply watched as the woman who had spat on his son's grave, who had stolen from the vulnerable and destroyed lives, was finally dragged into the light, powerless and humiliated, exactly where she belonged. The headlines came fast and merciless. Karen Whitmore's mugshot was plastered across every screen in the country, her once perfectly curated image shattered beyond repair. The queen of the HOA reduced to nothing more than a disgraced criminal with puffy red eyes, smudged mascara, and the hollow stare of someone who finally realized she was not invincible. News anchors didn't just report her crimes, they tore them apart piece by piece. Fraud, money laundering, exploitation of veterans, illegal evictions, conspiracy, and tax fraud. The worst blow came when the FBI announced that her so-called charity, the Honor First Foundation, was nothing but a front to fund her extravagant lifestyle. The public outrage turned white-hot. Veterans groups demanded she be sentenced to the maximum penalty. Politicians scrambled to condemn her. Talk shows featured entire segments titled The Rise and Fall of the HOA Queen. Jason watched it all unfold, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet, steady calm. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't need parades or fireworks. Sometimes justice was watching a monster finally lose control and knowing you'd been part of making it happen. Months passed. The chaos faded. The neighborhood quieted. The violation notices stopped. The clubhouse that had once been Karen's throne became just another building, its meetings held by new faces who spoke humbly and listened carefully. Life settled into something that felt almost peaceful. On a crisp autumn morning, Jason found himself once again standing in front of Mark's grave. The air smelled of fallen leaves and distant rain. He placed the familiar bouquet of deep red roses, each petal soft and unwavering. He rested his hand on the cool stone, tracing the letters slowly. "You got her, kid," he whispered. Not with fists, not with anger, but with truth, patience, and quiet strength, the very qualities Mark had always embodied. Jason stood there for a long moment, feeling lighter than he had in years. He turned and walked back to his truck, leaving behind the weight of a fight that was finally over. But as he drove home, one thought lingered in his mind. How many more Karens were out there? How many others had built kingdoms on fear and stolen dignity, believing they'd never be caught? He couldn't help but wonder. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or a Karen's, rules? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.